This project FunProd is about relationships between functional diversity and food production and quality under ecological intensification. Being a synthesis project, and Magnus already mentioned that, means we had to rely on existing data. We were also kind of a smaller consortium in the sense of funded colleagues we could employ in the project. But thanks to this fantastic group of medical scientists and environmental scientists that you can see here, I think we were still very successful and productive. So let me give you an overview of FunProd. It does work. Perfect. Thank you. So we were looking at major drivers of anthropogenic change in agricultural landscapes, being land use change, both landscape change, but also land use intensification and climate change, and how this affects functional diversity. And this is the key point in FunProd. We were not looking at traditional taxonomic diversity. We were focusing on, instead of the number of species or which species, we were focusing on what functional abilities, attributes, and properties do those species have to affect then, if you follow that scheme down, regulating and provisioning agroecosystems. So it's a much more functional approach. And we were then looking at how this affects agroecosystem health and human well-being. As a first part of this consortial work, we developed a framework and we provided a review of the evidence for these individual links in this flowchart here. That's the De La Riva paper you can see down there. And then we also developed a paper where we suggested how to analytically approach studies in the future that would look at the relationship between biodiversity and health, led by Werner Ulrich. Now, from this point, a few details from individual reviews. Our great colleague Roman Bucher, who was the employed scientist in the project, led here. For example, when we look at these bugs here, these are ground beetles. They are really the dominant generalist predators in European agricultural systems, together with spiders. And we wanted to look at the effect of landscape changes and land use intensification on the functional diversity of this group. In this pan-European review of data sets across Europe, we didn't find any strong relationships or effects of local management or landscape changes on the functional diversity of those beetles. But as you can see in this graph to the right, we found a strong relationship between the functional diversity of local ground beetle communities and the pest control service they perform. Especially when you move from a very low functional diversity in a certain community to communities with intermediate levels of functional diversity, pest control services are almost doubling. So there is a strong relationship of functional diversity and ecosystem service provision here. When we then go on and look a little bit more into detail for the health component, together with our nutritional scientists and health scientists in the consortium, we are currently working on a synthesis looking at the effect of organic agriculture on this whole cascade you see here. And there's now very limited evidence, very little literature on effects of organic farming and functional diversity of different communities. It's building up over the last 2 years now. We also found rather limited support for this strong relationship between functional diversity and recreation in agricultural landscapes. What there is there's quite a lot of supporting data for strong relationships between regulating agroecosystems like pollination and pest control and food production and food quantity. And we also found effects on human health by higher values of recreational ecosystem services and food production, of course. So to wrap it up, we were lucky applying for this project. The most recent CAP and the eco schemes were not yet implemented or even phrased, but we really addressed major aspects of these eco schemes, which are very relevant for the future of the European agriculture in the next years. Climate change, environmental care, landscape preservation are all the major drivers we focus on. What we found now in FunProd is that functional diversity is in fact really important for the provision of several ecosystem services. And I just gave you the one example of functional diversity in ground beetles. And to give you a more precise detail, we found, for example, that ground beetle communities which are dominated by smaller species have higher pest control values and services than ground beetle communities, which have a larger share of larger ground beetle species, okay? But the policy implications here are really tricky to address, and we have the panel discussion later. The question here is really how can we develop agricultural landscapes and local management to the benefit of those traits and those aspects of functional diversity that we observe to be beneficial for ecosystem services. And of course, how do we encourage those management practices with farmers and stakeholders? Thank you for your attention.